The Nigeria Labour Congress holds nationwide protest over moves by the National Assembly to remove the national minimum wage from the exclusive to the concurrent legislative list. And joining me to discuss this is political analyst Biodun Sowunmi. Thank you very much, Mr. Sowunmi, for joining us.
I'm pleased to be with you.
Let's talk about the Nigerian Labour Congress. Labour has been on this matter for so many years. Take it from the exclusive, put it in the concurrent. It's been one strike after the other, one ultimatum to another, and here we are again in 2021 talking about the same things. It has even taken them from just going on strike to protesting. Why do you think it's taken so long for the government of Nigeria, whether it be the Goodluck or the Obasanjo administration or the Buhari administration, to do what Labour is asking for?
Well, it's a very complex situation. If you really need to look at the system we are operating in the country to understand what we're talking about. That is why people have been calling for restructuring. In the first instance, we are operating a kind of unitary system called federalism. That is what we have in Nigeria today. Where most things are centralized, including budget, for public works. For instance, I'll give you an example. All the 36 states of the Federation are sharing 26%, which is 0.78% to a state not collecting 13% derivation, while only one government in that federation, which is the coordinating unit, federal government, collecting 52.68%. So you can imagine. And that is one of the anomalies. A lot of activities are centralized, in the center. So also wages. When it comes to workers' wage is centralized. So what you have is a kind of a centralized bargaining system where whatever is decided by the federal government through agreement with labor is what has to be implemented. Now, this is the problem. That works in a unitary system, but where we pretend to be practicing federalism, in a quasi form, not in its real form, then you run into a problem because it now depends on the states. The states are supposed to be separate sovereign units where they are supposed to go into negotiations, with their own workers and arrive at what they think is a fair compensation for the labor of the workers. But we are lumped in a system currently where whatever is decided at the center will have to be implemented at the state level. The intention of labor is very clear. The wage of a man working or a woman working in a civil service in Lagos is exactly the same what in Anambra State or in Kano State. That is the position of labor, which is fair because you are doing work of equal value, comparable value. Now, the sticking point is this, the ability to pay. The states are not wealthy, they are not well endowed equally. Some are even tapping their resources, others are not. You have states that you can say they're indolent, indolent state governments in Nigeria, where they're not fully, utilizing the capacities, of their state. So therefore, they have a major problem. Many of the states cannot pay the minimum wage as agreed currently. And what is fair to the workers is workers should be compensated adequately, for their labor, for the skills and all that. So that's the sticking point. The federal government, it's one thing for federal government to reach an agreement, is a different thing for the states to be able to pay. What the state is saying is, look, except you have to devolve, or we find another formula, which is the differential, which we're talking about. That is, we will pay the minimum wage, but we will not reflect it, in the salaries of other senior workers. That is not acceptable to labor. That is, we only protect the majority of workers who are earning very poor salary, put them on minimum wage. But those who are already highly paid will not get a raise, equal adjustment. And that is what labor is kicking in. That differential must be reflected. Otherwise, you are devaluing the cost of the labor of those people working at those higher levels. And that point is very, very clear. But the sticking problem is the issue of the nature of the system we are practicing. So what federal government is proposing to do, let me be fair, the House of Reps is proposing to do, is to move the issue of wage negotiation from the exclusive list, that is from what the federal government alone can deal with, to the concurrent list. Both governments can deal with it. That will now enable the state. The federal government can agree 30,000 minimum wage, then the state cannot go into a negotiation on ability to pay. That is what they're trying to do. And that is what Labour is saying, no, you cannot do that. Because we are talking about the most vulnerable workers in Nigeria, which is the minimum wage that they should earn, to be able to earn a decent living.
Let's take a look at a video and some remarks that was made by one of the protesters. And when we come back, we'll talk more about this, especially for the different states and what their capabilities are. Let's take a look.
Life is difficult enough. Life is unbearable enough for the common man. Every single worker that you see has many family members tied to him that depend on him. If the representatives will not go back to their states to go and collect minimum wage, they should not toy with our minimum wage. Make no mistake about it. The minimum wage is not only about government workers. It is a minimum wage that was fixed. It is a convention of ILO that was signed on to by Nigeria. As a responsible government, we cannot sign up to a convention and start to sabotage that same convention. It is not done anywhere in the world. We have irresponsible people in government, and we cannot sit by and watch them destroy us.
So very intriguing what he's saying. He's made some very interesting points, and I want to put them across to you, Mr. Sowunmi. He said, most importantly, that life is very difficult these days, and most of these staff have very many dependents. He also made something, he also said that the reps in the different states need to go back to their constituents and have some sort of conversation with them to arrive at some consensus or some compromise. Do you see that happening?
Yes, well, what the man is talking about three major issues. One is the fact that the times are tough in Nigeria with COVID-19, with the global recession. This is not the time for anyone to contemplate any reduction or any action that would lead to workers, being workers' labor being devalued. That is the first point. The second point he's making is about the fact that Nigeria signed up to International Labour Organization Treaty, and which committed us to the issue of minimum wage. So therefore, why should government now sign up to a treaty and then undermine the treaty through legislation through the House of Reps? The third point is also trying to make, is about the issue of the implication when you now turn around and ask people to go back locally and negotiate. Government and employers of laborers in the country, both private sector and government, they hold a hedge in terms of threatening people to say that, look, except you accept this, we will have to reduce the staffing levels. That impacts on labor finances on one part, and on the other part, it also increases unemployment in a country where there is no welfare benefit. Those are the issues the gentleman was raising in that video. Now,
let's talk about the realities in the different states, which you mentioned earlier on, that there are certain states that may not be able to keep up with this minimum wage. In fact, there's so many states that signed up to it but have not been able to meet up. Now, the other reality is that there are people who have come up with the idea that nationwide, we have a bloated civil service, and most of the things that some of them are doing can be replaced. In other words, one person can do some of the jobs of the people in the civil service. Some of them are redundant, and they're saying if you reduce the number of workers in the civil service, you'd probably be able to pay people favorably and deal with all the problems that you have in the civil service. But there are also people who kick against that. Just like you said, there might just be a loss of people who will be out of jobs, and that also can constitute another problem entirely for the government. But where do you stand on this?
Yeah, what you see is that you are actually referring to Orosaye's report, where about 250 parastatals are duplicated in the country. That is leading to a huge wastage, is what they call Kwango, job for the boys. And as long as federal government insists on maintaining this Kwango, they have no moral basis to complain that they do not have money to pay to workers. That is a major fact. Because when you create Kwango's job for the boys, for the political class, what about the working class? That's one angle to it. Number two, when you look at our country today, we are such in a terrible, difficult moral situation. You're talking about a country where within 3 months, a senator or a member of House of Reps earned a whopping 28 million naira. And then you find it difficult to pay 30,000. Nobody will understand that with you, because when you look at the expenditure on the National Assembly alone, is more than enough to pay twice the double minimum wage. Just go and look at the total wage bill of the federal government and how much they are consuming, plus the wastages, through Kwango, job for the boys. People talk about the fact that we have so many people redundant in the civil service. I don't believe that. It's simply we do not get productivity out of the workers employed because we have always been living on, cheap oil. How many governments are fully realizing the internal generated revenue that they should be getting? So we have people who can work, but they are not being made to do those work, while at the same time, we have created duplication of several agencies, which are consuming billions, several billions a year. And at the same time, the political class are getting rewarded, in a very offensive way. So how do they turn around and say workers cannot get 30,000 naira minimum? In the presidency, how much is being spent on food alone? Go and look at the budget; it's over 8 billion naira. And in some cases, you hear Asoro Clinic 5 billion naira, when in reality, an average hospital, general hospital, dealing with majority of the people living in the country are not funded to the tune of 5 billion naira a year. So these are the issues, the inequalities. And as long as you have all these issues in relation to funding, in relation to wastage within the system, you cannot even focus on the human wastage, in terms of excess workers, being employed, or workers being employed, not doing any real job within the system. So those are the major issues. We need to call a spade a spade. We need to restructure the country. We need to look at the civil service. We need to eliminate the duplication of jobs. We also need to get workers, productivity out of workers, to the maximum, while they are also equally remunerated. I think these are the major issues.
Let's talk about the issue of creating other job opportunities, because it looks like every time we talk about labor, we're just talking about those who are in the civil service, whether be it state or federal. And you also mentioned the fact that we just rely on our oil money to sustain the country. The Aronsa area reports is something that we keep referring to, but we never really want to deal with it because you said it, we have a moral issue. How about government being selfless? Because in the whole, I think worldwide, Kenyan government officials are the highest earners. I think the National Assembly members, followed by Nigerians, if not Nigerians, before the Kenyans. And like you rightly stated, we have an issue where people are working, but they don't have that much money to as take-home pay. It doesn't even take them home. Is there any way that we can advocate, as they have said that National Assembly members should go back to their constituents? Can constituents advocate that there be a pay slash? I remember when President Buhari came into office, he and his vice president said they were going to be taking only 50% of their salaries. Can that not be implemented? Because you have also clearly stated that there's so much money going into National Assembly members who sit maybe 3 times a week. Can we be advocating in that direction? Or do we look at how we can reduce service, people who are working in the service, and maybe rejig our industries that are all moribund as we speak?
Yes. What you see is that those who are benefiting more from the system in Nigeria, those who are being, insanely rewarded, in terms of members of the National Assembly, are also the same people to implement legislation, to carry out oversight functions, to ensure that we do not have those duplications. And because they are benefiting from the system, they have no desire to tamper with it. And that is why you still have one go for the budgets. Because budgets are presented by the executive on an annual basis to them. They have the right to say, no, we are not going to fund this. This is a duplication of this particular service. But they are not doing that because they are also, caught up. It's about everybody taking as of the cake, forgetting the poor workers and the unemployed people in the country. So as far as I see it, that is why many people were calling for restructure. If we do not restructure the polity in the way that we will whittle down the level of funding available to federal government so that state government who are closer to the people can afford to fund services, we will continue to have a problem. And we also need to look at what the federal government itself is spending. The emolution is not the salary. Make a mistake about National Assembly ministers. It's not about their salary. It's about, the allowance which they have. The salary is regulated by RAMFAC, and the emoluments are fixed by the money, which, legally loot the country.
Well, I want to thank you very much. Biodun Sowunmi is a political analyst. Thank you for being part of this conversation. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we want to find out what Nigerians are saying about the Labour Congress protest. And when we return, I'll give you my take.
I don't know what the Labour Congress are fighting for. There is even disparity in the standard of living and cost of living between the states. So you don't expect, you cannot compare the standard of living or cost of living of Lagos State with other states, or Port Harcourt with other states, or Abuja with other states. So they should allow the Labour to do the needful, the National Assembly to do the needful, so that the states should negotiate according to what they can pay. What they should supposed to be fighting for is cost of living and standard of living. I think there must be negotiation between federal government and they should let the federal government give them mass transits like what Lagos State is doing. So reduce the cost and check the housing, the transportation. Those are the areas the Labour is supposed to be fighting, not minimum wage.
All right, for me, as long as their action or their cause is in the interest of the masses, the common people, I support them.
On the issue of this Labour protest, they cannot be blamed. They are fighting for us all. Look at the situation of the country. Fuel hike, NEPA B, exorbitant B is too much. So we can't bear it. They are fighting for our cause.
Regarding Labour, I think so far so good. Labour, they have not been putting their best toward either by strike or whatever or something like that. It's not just to strike, but whenever you want to go for strike or to do or whatever, it's just for you or for the union to achieve their targeted aim. It's not just about strike, then at the end of the day, they still remain where they are.
Strike actions have been a way of getting government to pay attention to the needs of the organized labor and the Nigerian people. But most recently, we have taken a different turn where even the people who are being fought for or protested, in their interest, they seem left out and confused as to what labor is really fighting for. These days, many will liken labor demands as political, like that of the members of our National Assembly who push and fight for cars and allowances when it's convenient for them. Now, does it mean that labor demands aren't legitimate or real? No. But they seem to have lost the plot. This is where people have a problem. How do we get government to respect and meet the demands of labor? How do we make sure that strike actions or protests of this kind still carry the weight that it did in time past? Labor needs to look inward. And on the part of our governments, they need to keep their words. They have continually backpedaled on agreements, making themselves seem unreliable and not to be trusted by labor. So, dear Nigerian government, enough is enough. It's time for you to stop wasting the time of our people. Say what you mean and mean what you say. The welfare of your workers should be your utmost priority. Treat them right so that they can do their jobs well. I am Marianne Okon, thanking you for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.